Episode 10.
The fermentation of the present terrorism. Islam entered Nigeria in the 11th century by way of trade and migration through Bornu in the northeast. It came in the same way to Hausaland and the Yoruba-speaking area in the southwest around the 14th century during the Mali Empire. However, Fulani Jihad, which started in 1804, led by Usman Dan Fodio, an Islamic scholar and teacher, against the Hausa kingdoms in northwestern Nigeria, created the Sokoto Caliphate, but was decisively repelled by Kanem Bornu in the northeast. From that time on, Islamization as a political process of ethnic hegemony, leadership recruitment, and religious supremacy began in northern Nigeria. So it was until the British colonialists' conquest in 1903 and the amalgamation of both northern and southern protectorates into one state. Ever since, the only two things that the two regions shared peacefully were the name of the country, Nigeria, and victory of Super Eagles. The subsequent long-standing struggle for ethno-religious supremacy and political leadership has transformed in the last decades into terrorism in the forms of militancy in the south and the Boko Haram insurgency in the north. The militancy, specifically in Niger Delta and southeastern states, is driven by injustice, inequity, deprivation, and exploitation. These identifiable grievances are on the table, which makes it easier for the government to engage the drivers and dialogue with a view to reaching a compromise. Whereas the Boko Haram insurgents or terrorists reject altogether democracy, secularism, and westernization. These are reckoned to be the root cause of all corruption, with a promise of revolutionary changes that would establish a godly social order in place of democracy. Boko Haram and Islamic fundamentalism. Boko Haram's, meaning Western education is forbidden, real name is Jamaat al-As-Sunnah lid-Dawa wa al-Jihad, people committed to the Prophet's teaching for propagation and jihad. It is a Sunni Salafi jihadi group, which later splintered into three: Boko Haram, Ansaru, and ISWAP, Islamic State of West African Province. They all have one goal: to establish an Islamic State with a full complement of Sharia law in Nigeria. The Islamist group operated many years under the cover of Izala movement, or Jama'atu Izalatul Bida wa Iqamatus Sunnah, or JIBWIS, before the clashes with the Nigerian government security forces in 2009 in Borno State. Hundreds of its members, including the leader Muhammad Yusuf, were killed. Quite a number fled to Algeria and Somalia, where they found shelter among Al-Qaeda-linked organizations like AQIM, or Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and Al-Shabaab. Izala movement was established in 1978 by Abu Bakr Mahmoud Gumi, an Islamic scholar and Grand Qadi of the northern region of Nigeria, with his former students led by Sheikh Ismaila Idris. The Izala movement, or JIBWIS, introduced the Islamic fundamentalism of Saudi Arabian Wahhabism to Nigeria's Muslim northern region. In time, the movement becomes the most influential Islamic body in the country, determining national politics and governance. In fact, it exerts a level of influence over Nigeria's national politics and governance that is unprecedented for a religious body in Nigeria. In a way, its members hold sway as Nigeria's deep state. For example, its members become some of Nigeria's most revered imams and clerics, high-ranking officers in the Nigerian armed forces, security organizations, and bureaucracy. It is almost impossible to achieve power or anything of consequence in many parts of northern Nigeria, and maybe in Nigeria without the Izala movement directly or indirectly. Though Gumi believed that Nigerian Muslims should never accept a non-Muslim ruler, he, however, advocated for peaceful coexistence with non-Muslims. This non-inclusive practice of democracy in northern Nigeria politics is peculiar to date. Nursing terrorism. When Olusegun Obasanjo, a Christian from Southwest, was elected president in 1999, contrary to what obtained, there was the introduction of full Sharia incorporating civil and criminal matters in Zamfara State on the 27th of October 1999, and subsequently in 11 predominantly Muslim northern states. There was also the clandestine establishment of terrorist cells in a number of states, including Kano and Katsina. These were part of the rejection of a non-Muslim president by the Muslim North and its Islamic political agenda in the country. But the government of President Olusegun Obasanjo responded appropriately as much as it could then. The letter of Ambassador Aminu B. Wali, permanent representative of Nigeria to the United Nations, addressed to the chairman of the counter-terrorism in 2006, attested to its efforts. 1 international terrorism money launderer and 2 local Taliban focal persons in Nigeria who were exposed were arrested, prosecuted, and assets confiscated by the federal government between 2002 and 2006. They were terrorists' funders and agents of GSPC, Groupe Salafiste pour la Prédication et le Combat, or Salafist Group for Preaching and Combat, an illegal Salafi terrorist organization based in Algeria which is affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. GSPC provides training, funding, and support to the Islamists and jihadi fighters around the world. In 2005, the Department of State Services, DSS, arrested 6 local Taliban extremists returning from GSPC terrorist camp. The money in their possession was seized. It had earlier in 2002 foiled attempts by GSPC to establish terrorist cells in Katsina and Kano. The leader of the GSPC terrorist network in Nigeria was Yakubu Musa Kafanchan. Funding terrorism. The money launderer and terrorist financier the federal government tracked down and prosecuted in 2006 was Ahmed Idris Nasreddin, an Eritrean and founder of NASCO Group Nigeria Limited, headquartered in Jos. Also, the headquarters of Izala movement. Based on information available to Italy and the United States, in collaborative efforts of other countries, he and Yusuf Nada were discovered to be involved in an extensive conglomeration of businesses from which they derived income to fund terrorist-related activities and launder money around the world. Of 25 designated terrorist entities linked to Al-Qaeda in October 2001, 14 of the 25 were owned or controlled by either Ahmed Idris Nasreddin or Yusuf Nada. He died in 2021 at the age of 96 years, passing the baton to his son, Dr. Atiya Nasreddin, the chairman of NASCO Group. Sheikh Yakubu Musa Kafachan, also known as Sheikh Yakubu Musa Katsina and Yakubu Musa Hassan, is a founding member of Izala movement, current chairman of its board of trustees and chairman of Katsina State Chapter. He is the leader of the Taliban terror network who tried to set up terror cells in Katsina and Kano as far back as 2002, was arrested and prosecuted by DSS. Today, he is a widely respected Islamic cleric and a very close personal friend and public associate of Isa Pantami, the Minister of Communications and Digital Economy, who, in his own right, supported extremist ideologies of terror groups such as Al-Qaeda and Taliban. That Isa Pantami's office oversees the country's databases makes many Nigerians uncomfortable. Another attempt in 2003 by another Taliban group to set up a camp in Yobe State was dismantled. Similarly, the activities of Al-Haji Shahru Haruna, a GSPC agent who funds the operations of terrorists like Kabiru Umar, also known as Kabiru Sokoto, the bomber of St. Teresa's Catholic Church, Madala, killing 35 people and wounding another 52 on Christmas Day 2011, was detected and dismantled. Boko Haram claimed responsibility for the attack and other bomb attacks that occurred almost simultaneously at different locations. During the trial of Kabiru Sokoto 2 years later, it came to light that an Algerian Islamist group provided funding and support worth $250,000 for the dastardly act. On June 5, 2022, there was a similar terrorist attack on St. Francis's Catholic Church in Owo Town, Ondo State, on Pentecost Sunday. 40 worshippers were killed, including children, and several others were injured. On June 9th, the National Security Council claimed that ISWAP terrorists were responsible for the attack. The Minister of Interior, Mr. Rauf Aregbesola, briefing the State House correspondent, said the imprint of ISWAP has been found on the scene of the attack. It is not an ethno-religious thing, he said. But Governor Rotimo Akeredolu of Ondo State faulted the federal government's stand for lack of empirical evidence, as it was not the normal practice of ISWAP not to own up to their acts and almost immediately take credit for their action. Some security experts also faulted the claims by the federal government that members of the Islamic State of West Africa province were responsible for the attack. The terror group has influence in the northeastern region of the country, though gradually spreading dominance in states like Taraba and Kogi, where they had attacked but claimed responsibility less than 48 hours after. A research fellow with National Centre for Science Research Institution in France, Vincent Foucher, held a similar view. Foucher told The Whistler, an online newspaper, quote, "If ISWAP is responsible, they will be putting out a claim because the spate of attacks they engaged in Kogi and Taraba, away from the northeast, where they do most of the attacks, were publicized by them. They make huge efforts to put out claims because if it is not claimed, then it's of no influence at all. Such claims are about a showing of strength." End quote. For example, the Islamic State-backed faction of Boko Haram, ISWAP, claimed responsibility for the killing of 2 businessmen, Ifeanyi Ilechukwu, 41, and Chibuel Emmanuel, 33, in Kano State, on Saturday, the 25th of September, 2022. The terror group in a statement said the attack was carried out by soldiers of the Caliphate against Nigerian army spies. This was a few days after it said its men attacked the police checkpoints in Edo and Ondo states. However, Kabi Adamu, a security expert and founder of Beacon Consulting Limited, told a newspaper that there was the probability of ISWAP perpetrating the attack, as Kogi and Ondo states share common borders. But the general allegation across the southern states was pointing towards Fulani herdsman militia. Mayeti Allah Kautal Hore and Mayeti Allah Cattle Breeders Association of Nigeria that have been threatening the Ondo State governor, who doubles as chairman of the Southern Governors Forum over the anti-open grazing law. No one or group took responsibility for the attack until Tuesday the 9th of August, when Chief of Defence Staff General Lucky Irabor disclosed that 5 of the terrorists behind the attack had been arrested. The following day, Defence Headquarters DHQ shared 2 statements, one after the other, to clarify the earlier statement made by the Chief of Defence Staff on Tuesday. The first said only one of those arrested was linked to the attack. The second statement, used to replace the first, explained that although 4 of the arrested persons took part in the attack, only one of them was the mastermind. Following the earlier statement by the Chief of Defence Staff, Nigerians took to social media to question how one of the arrested suspects, Idris Ojo, who was said to have escaped from Kuje prison in July during the terrorist prison breakout, was able to launch an attack in Owo in June. The defence spokesperson Jimmy Akpor, in the Wednesday statement, admitted that Idris Ojo was one of the Boko Haram terrorists who escaped from Kuje prison and had no link to the attack at Owo. Many people believe the whole government's posturing smells of a smokescreen. It was as if federal government, having declared a position, it was working towards establishing it. Apparently, the Nigerian deep state that has the levers of terrorism and its policy of allowing Islamic fundamentalism to flourish are the actual issues of concern. Sheikh Yakubu Musa Katsina has been known to the Nigerian security forces as the leader of a terror network as far back as 2002, when he tried to set up terror cells in Katsina and Kano. Also, Alhaji Shahru Haruna is not unknown to the government as a terrorist financier. He too is a ranking member of the Izala movement Kano State Chapter. An investigative journalist, David Hundeyin, revealed he operates several companies registered under the Dandima name according to Corporate Affairs Commission, and launders the proceeds from the companies, including smuggling operations for terrorist activities. The companies include Dandima Bureau de Change Limited, Abuja, Dandima Global Investment Limited, Kano, Dandima Agricultural Development Limited, Abuja, Dandima Petroleum Limited, Abuja, Dandima Enterprises, Abuja, and Dandima General Service, Abuja. Though he is identified by the Nigerian government itself as a security threat for funding terror via money laundering, he is allowed to own and operate a Bureau de Change, BDC. A Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, circular of March 2020 listing approved BDCs confirmed Haruna Shahru was allowed to run a BDC, Dandima BDC Limited, No. 2 Manzini Street, near Mr. Biggs, Wuse Zone 4, Abuja, potentially giving him access to US dollars required to fund terror and import illegal arms. The CBN Governor, Godwin Emefiele, made the observation in the monthly Monetary Policy Committee meeting of September 2021. Quote, "Whether it's Boko Haram, kidnapping and all sorts of nefarious activities, BDCs take our country's dollar and sell to people to go and buy arms and ammunition to come and hurt us. That's what people want us to continue to do." End quote. These people are like the archetypes of Yakuba Musa Katsina and Haruna Shahru, who, though are agents of GSPC financing terrorist activities, are not only free men today, but powerful men who retain their positions in Nigeria's most influential Muslim body, as respected Islamic preachers with access to the who's who of Nigerian politics and governance. But since the United Arab Emirates, UAE, convicted 6 Nigerians in 2020, Suraju Abubakar Muhammad and Saleh Yusuf Adamu, for life in prison, Ibrahim Ali Al-Hassan Abdurrahman Adu Musa, Bashir Yusuf and Muhammad Ibrahim Isa were each given a 10-year sentence for funding Boko Haram. The government has been prevaricating. The Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami, had announced more than once that the Nigerian government was about to begin the prosecution of about 400 suspected Boko Haram financiers and was profiling some powerful Nigerians strongly suspected to be financing terrorism for prosecution. It has been under fresh pressure to name and prosecute financiers of terrorism in the country and their collaborators as proof of its sincerity. The Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, did not give the names of the sponsors and companies linked with terrorism. However, he disclosed the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, NFIU, has uncovered 96 financiers of terrorism, including 424 associates and supporters of the financiers. He said the fraud unit also added 123 companies and 33 bureaux de change linked with terrorism in the country. Speaking further on terrorism, he revealed NFIU had intelligence exchanges on Boko Haram, ISWAP, banditry, kidnapping and others with 19 countries. Even though the two ministers were speaking for the same government, there was no certainty they were speaking the same thing on the same subject. It is an indication of trust deficit within the government which has impacted negatively on governance. APC Buhari government's complicity. Notwithstanding the insurgency of Boko Haram since 2009, it is obvious that Buhari APC government is complicit in creating and sustaining the current nationwide insecurity, whether it is banditry or widespread Fulani herdsman militia collaboration with terrorist groups. In February 2021, Abubakar Kawu Baraje, former acting chairman, People's Democratic Party, PDP, and later the chieftain of the APC, revealed the party was culpable for the security crisis plaguing the country. He traced the origin of the increasing insecurity to the activities of the Fulani that were brought in from neighboring countries, namely Sierra Leone, Mali, Senegal, Niger, and Chad, to facilitate victory for the APC in the 2015 election. He admonished Nigerians, quote, "We are not asking the right questions on how the same Fulani we have been living with suddenly turned out to be a menace. We also must ask how they had access to their guns. The security agencies have not been open about the nature of the problem. They have made arrests. Why haven't they told the public who the terrorists are? After the election, the Fulani, that were brought in, refused to leave. I and others of like mind wrote and warned those we started APC with that this was going to happen, but nobody listened." End quote. Nigeria, like many developing countries with weak rule of law, has been particularly susceptible to massive transnational organized crime penetration since the inception of APC government in 2015. The apparent growing nexus among transnational organized crime groups and elements of the government, including intelligence services, armed forces and high-level business figures, represents a significant threat to the economy and democratic institutions. The CEO of Chevron Nigeria, Richard Kennedy, when commenting on the newly passed Petroleum Industry Act 2021, disclosed that crude oil theft in Nigeria is an organized crime and should be differentiated completely from host community issues, as the government wants people to believe. But President Buhari, in an interview with Bloomberg, a US-based publication, in June 2022, insisted that the vandalism and oil theft allegedly carried out by indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, were responsible for the shortfall of the daily oil production quota. He said, quote, "Criminality and terrorism in oil-producing regions hamper production, and it would help if our Western allies designated IPOB as a terrorist group, given their complicity in damage to pipelines and infrastructure." End quote. Such government propaganda is deliberate to obfuscate people than enlighten them. It puts a veil on the connection between transnational organized crime like crude oil theft and illegal gold mining, terrorist financing, and Boko Haram insurgency, banditry, and demographic alterations. He unabashedly did not tell the Western allies that Nigeria is witnessing unprecedented insecurity he aided through his kinsman. When Benue State Governor Samuel Ortom says for the umpteenth time the Fulani militia has been working with terrorists to attack Nigeria, killing and kidnapping farmers, raping women and girls and sacking villages, he was condemned for ethnic profiling. But when Sheikh Abu Bakr Gumi and other resource persons at the two-day First Interactive Policy Dialogue and Cultural Festival organized by the Mayeti Ala Kautal Hore owned the killings and kidnappings as an expression of genuine grievances against the state and people of Nigeria, they were not condemned. It was at the maiden convergence of Fulanis from 16 West African countries at Abuja on June 2, 2022. The pervading state terrorism gives cover to corrupt officials who turn a blind eye to the terrorists and transnational organized crime activities. It exacerbates corruption and undermines governance, rule of law, judicial systems and transparency. Hence, the terrorists positioned themselves as alternate providers of governance, security, services and livelihoods. Heart-rending episodes in states like Kaduna, Niger, Katsina, Zamfara and others show how criminal control of territory and abduction for ransom generate a significant sum of illicit revenue and promote the spread of government instability. One of the elders of rural communities in Katsina State, Dr. Bashir Kufi, speaking on behalf of the others in an interview with BBC Hausa Service, lamented that men in their villages now work as slaves on farms illegally owned by bandits, and their women and girls are raped. Kufi said, "Even more worrisome, these bandits will knock at the doors of villages and ask the men to bring out their wives and daughters. These hapless men have no option but to obey or will face the music. The wife or daughter would go with the bandits for 1 or 2 weeks and return to their homes after being sexually abused or raped. This is the calamity that has befallen most of our communities." He expressed his dismay at the way the bandits were inflicting pain on the people, as if we don't have a government. "What is really happening?" he asked. "Why is the government aloof? It is as if the governments, both central and sub-national in the northern states, have surrendered to the terrorists in the name of dialogue or negotiation." In a BBC Africa Eye documentary, a certain Bello Turji, a Fulani notorious terrorist and bandit warlord, looked into a reporter's camera and triumphantly announced that he had lost count of the number of people he had killed. He claims to be a practicing Muslim and a close friend of Islamic scholar Dr. Ahmed Gumi. He enforces Sharia law in the towns and villages he controls, especially in Zamfara and Sokoto states. But when finally President Buhari gave full freedom to the military to take the battle to terrorist hideouts on August the 2nd, and the military decided to raid the terrorist camp in Zamfara, Bello Tunji reported he felt betrayed. The bandits were said to be attending a wedding ceremony with Turji in Shinkafe, LGA, when the area was bombed in the forest. He escaped. Within 3 days before the incident, 50 persons were abducted by terrorists in Damari. Burning Gwarin, LGA, Kaduna State, and hundreds were sent out of the community. 18 persons were reportedly killed after bandits clashed with vigilante group in Wase, LGA of Plateau State, and 26 persons drowned in an attempt to escape a gun battle with the bandits in Duma village, Tureta, LGA, Sokoto State. There is Ado Elero too, the leader of a terrorist group that operates in parts of Zamfara and Katsina, who also spoke with Deutsche Welle radio and confessed that he had killed as many as the sands of the desert, hyperbole. In June 2020, Alero was wanted by the police for the killing of over 100 persons in Kadiso village, Faskari, LGA, Katsina. Similarly, in Zamfara state, he and his team of bandits unleashed terror on locals in the state, while government seemed to be at a loss on what to do to arrest the embarrassing situation. But appraising the failure of the government to arrest the situation, the Emir in council chose to bestow on the Fulani terrorists an honourable title. He was turbaned as Sakin Fulani in Yantodo Emirate of Zamfara state, in broad daylight, to the bewilderment of everyone, including the victims. However, a few hours after they bestowed on him the title, in the presence of the representative of the Commissioner of Information, Ibrahim Magaji Dosara, the sole administrator of Safi and Yandoto Emirate Councils of Zamfara, Alhaji Aminu Muri, State Commissioner for Internal Security and Home Affairs, Mohammed Ibrahim Safi, and other government functionaries, there was public condemnation, leading to the suspension of the emir. But while speaking with the foreign radio, the bandits' kingpin, Alero, said he did not beg for the title, but the community deemed it fit. How could government pretend to be ignorant of the chieftaincy title and the ceremony? That was another example of deception that the former Chief of Army Staff and Minister of Defense, Lieutenant General Theophilus Y. Danjuma, warned the whole nation about, while, in fact, the government is complicit in the cover-up. It is argued that fundamentalist Muslims or terrorists have objectives that are absolutist, inflexible, and hostile to negotiation. Someone said, quote, "Today's terrorists don't want a seat at the table. They want to destroy the table and everyone sitting at it." End quote.
Thank you for listening to episode 10 of Show the House to the House. You can now listen to episode 11 on the same channel.